Imagine a millionaire heir, accustomed to power and control, who finds something in his condominium's new security guard that he never expected. A challenge. Helena Costa is not just an employee. She is a mystery with a past that no one dares touch. But what if this past brings to light secrets that will shake Lucas Santoro's world and force him to confront everything he knows? What happens when attraction grows, social conventions are broken, and choices become inevitable? Stay until the end of this story, because the love that is born between such opposing worlds will face barriers that not even Lucas's fortune can buy. Surprising twists and turns, and an ending you won't forget. Still think you know the power of a true choice? The sound of the automatic gates of the Aguas Claras condominium echoed through the entrance, while Helena Costa adjusted her uniform belt and checked the radio strapped to her shoulder. The shift had barely started, and she could already feel the curious and appraising looks of the residents who drove by. One of them, when lowering the window, analyzed it quickly before murmuring to the driver, "A new guard? They must be desperate." And the window went up before Helena could say anything. She was already used to silent judgments. I knew what those looks meant. For many people, his presence there seemed an uncomfortable contrast, but she wasn't there to be accepted. He was there to do the work he had committed to doing. "Ready for the first round?" asked the head of security, a tall man with a rigid posture while crossing his arms. "Always ready, sir," Helena replied, maintaining her professional posture. He studied her for a moment, as if to confirm the authenticity of her answer, before nodding his head. "There's no room for error here. The residents of this condominium like everything to be perfect. No questions, no inattention. Discretion is essential." He paused before completing. "And remember, in this place, surveillance means invisibility." Helena just nodded. It was a speech I had heard elsewhere. She knew exactly what invisibility meant. Do your job, and don't you dare leave your seat. Later, while checking the vehicle registration at the guardhouse, a luxurious black car stopped in front of the gate. The driver didn't seem in a hurry. He rolled down the window, revealing a man in an impeccable suit, his hair carefully groomed, and a phone pressed to his ear. He ended the call quickly before looking at Helena with an expression of surprise and slight arrogance. "Document, please," Helena asked with a firm voice. "Document? Do you know who I am?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "No, sir, but to get in, I need to check," she replied without hesitation. For a moment he seemed to consider arguing. Then, with a sigh, he reached for his wallet and handed over his ID. "Lucas Santoro, penthouse owner." "Do I really need to go through this?" he asked with a smile that mixed sarcasm and incredulity. "Yes, Mr. Santoro. Protocol applies to everyone," Helena replied, while checking the information in the system. After confirming the data, he returned the document and waved him in. "Welcome back, sir," she said, without looking away. Lucas watched her for a moment longer before accelerating, muttering to himself, "She is brave. Nobody talks to me like that." Once inside the house, Lucas threw his jacket over the armchair and poured himself a glass of whiskey. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about the guard. There was something different about her, something that bothered and intrigued him at the same time. Meanwhile, at the gate, Helena checked the shift reports. For her, that interaction had been nothing more than part of the job. But deep down, a feeling told him that this was just the beginning of something bigger. The following days were marked by increasingly frequent interactions between Lucas and Helena. He always seemed to find a reason to pass through the gate, even when there was no need. One night, Lucas arrived from a business dinner visibly tired, but stopped to observe Helena. "Always so focused," he said, with a smile that tried to appear casual. Helena looked up from her notebook and stared at it for a moment. "Work requires focus, Mr. Santoro," she replied, returning to writing. Do you know how to relax, or is it always so serious?" he provoked. Helena just smiled, without letting herself be carried away by the provocation. "Relaxing is not part of guard training," he replied, his tone full of professionalism. Lucas laughed, shaking his head. He had never met someone so resistant to his attempts to break the ice. Later that week, an incident at the condominium gave Helena the chance to show a more human side. Lucas, as he rushed out, ended up slamming the car door hard, jamming the mechanism. He grumbled, trying to open it without success. Helena, who was on duty, approached calmly. "Do you need help?" he asked, arching an eyebrow. "No, thanks. I think I can solve it on my own," he replied, trying to sound confident. "Of course, it seems to be going very well," she said, with a slight touch of sarcasm. Before Lucas could protest, Helena pulled a tool from her belt and skillfully unlocked the door. "Impressive," he said, looking at her with admiration. "It's just practice," Helena replied, adjusting the tool on her belt. "Some of us learn in necessity, not in luxury." Her answer kept echoing in Lucas's mind. For the first time, he realized that there was much more to Helena than met the eye. That night, as he sipped wine in his penthouse, he couldn't stop thinking about the guard. However, the moment that marked him most was a conversation at the end of a shift. He was leaving for an appointment and found Helena writing something down in a notebook. Curious, he asked, "You're always writing. What do you write down so much?" "These are reports," she replied automatically. "They don't look like reports. It feels more personal," Lucas insisted. Helena hesitated for a moment before responding. "These are not just reports. Sometimes I write about the things I want to do. Dreams, perhaps," she said, trying to minimize what she had revealed. "Dreams? And what are they?" Lucas asked, intrigued. "Maybe one day I'll tell you," Helena replied, looking away. Lucas smiled. That little exchange made it clear that there was a lot to be discovered about her, and he was more than willing to keep trying. Helena was adjusting the radio in the guardhouse when she noticed two residents walking near the gate. They spoke quietly, but their voices echoed in the silence of the night. "Have you noticed how Lucas is always here when she's on duty?" whispered a woman, adjusting her scarf. "Of course I noticed. It's impossible to ignore. But it won't end well, you know," replied the man next to him. Helena sighed discreetly, pretending not to hear. "I was already used to being watched, but the whispers bothered me more than I liked to admit." She knew that her presence there was enough to cause discomfort. However, she couldn't let that affect her. Later that night, Lucas arrived at the condo after an event. Helena, as always, asked for his identification, but he seemed more serious than usual. "Don't you think you've already proved your point?" he said, handing over the document. "Protocol is protocol, Mr. Santoro," she replied calmly. He sighed, but instead of heading straight home, he decided to stop and talk to her. "I heard things, Helena. People are talking about us," he said, crossing his arms. "Us? There is no us, sir," Helena replied firmly. "I'm just a guard. You are one of the residents. There is no reason for comments." "What if I wanted to change that?" Lucas asked, his tone now more direct. Helena stared at him for a moment before responding. "Then I would say it's not a good idea." The next morning, Lucas was called into his father's office. Sitting behind a dark wooden table, the patriarch of the Santoro family watched him with a critical eye. "Lucas, people are talking," said the man, his voice heavy, "about you and the guard. This is not acceptable." "And why not?" Lucas replied, crossing his arms. "Because we are the Santoro. We have an image to maintain. This type of association does not match our name," replied the father categorically. "Maybe I don't care about the name as much as you do," Lucas said before leaving the room. Later, Helena received news from another employee that her closeness to Lucas was causing problems. Determined to avoid further complications, she walked away. We cannot afford to make mistakes, Helena said to Lucas in a brief conversation at the gate. I'm not asking you to make a mistake. I'm asking you to trust me, he replied, but Helena didn't give him another chance. She knew they both belonged to different worlds, and trying to cross that line would only bring more pain. Lucas was on the top floor observing the view from the condominium while trying to organize his thoughts. He couldn't ignore the way Helena made him feel, but the pressure from his family and the comments around him was starting to take a toll. He needed answers. He needed to understand more about her. As he went down to walk through the gardens, he heard a conversation between two employees near the guardhouse. They spoke quietly, but Helena's name made him stop. You know why she dropped everything, don't you? Asked one of them. Yes, I heard that she was a teacher before, but after what happened. The other hesitated. I don't know how she still has the courage to move on. Lucas frowned. Teachers generally don't turn into guards without a good reason. Determined, he went to one of the condominium's oldest doormen, Carlos, who seemed to know more about the subject. Carlos, I need to know something about Helena, Lucas said directly. Why does she work here? What happened in her past? Carlos hesitated but finally responded. It's not my story to tell, Mr. Santoro, but Helena was an excellent teacher until a tragic accident on a school trip. One of the children was injured, and although it was not her fault, she was held responsible. He paused before completing. He lost his license, his reputation, everything. Lucas was silent for a moment, trying to digest the information. He knew he needed to hear the story from Helena herself. Later that night, he found her at the guardhouse and called her in for a talk. Helena, initially reluctant, agreed to speak. I heard about what happened when you were a teacher. I want to understand, Lucas said, looking her in the eyes. Helena sighed, crossing her arms. There's not much to understand. An accident happened. A child was injured and everyone blamed me. I lost everything I built, she said, her voice full of bitterness. And now I'm here, trying to start over, but people love to remind me of who I was. But you are not defined by what happened, Lucas replied, his voice firm. This cannot erase who you are. And who am I, Lucas? A vigilante trying to survive in a world that doesn't want me, she asked, challenging him. Lucas watched her for a moment before responding. You are someone who fights, who doesn't give up, even when everything is against you, and that's what I admire most about you. The intensity of the moment was interrupted by the sound of Helena's radio, calling her back to work. Before leaving, she looked at Lucas. I don't need you to admire me. I need you to understand that I don't want to be saved, she said seriously. I'm not here to save you, Helena. I'm here to walk alongside you. Lucas replied, his voice soft but full of determination. As Helena returned to her position, Lucas stood by, watching her leave. He knew that the decision to fight for her or give in to the pressure was getting closer and closer, and for the first time he felt like he knew exactly what to do. The next morning, Lucas made his decision. He knew he could no longer live up to his family's expectations. It was time to act. During breakfast, he gathered his parents and some relatives in the mansion's large dining room. Evelyn, his mother, noticed his seriousness immediately. What happened, Lucas? Looks like you have something important to say, she commented, holding a cup of coffee. Lucas took a deep breath before starting. That's exactly it, Mom. I want to talk about my life, he said, looking at everyone around the table. I chose to live for myself, not for what is expected of me. Lucas's father, Roberto Santoro, raised his eyebrows. Does this have to do with the vigilante? He asked directly. Because if so, I hope you've thought better of this absurd idea. Lucas remained calm. It has everything to do with her. But it's not just about Helena. This is about me. I'm tired of living in a mold that I never wanted. He looked around. I admire her, respect her, and Yes, I love Helena, and I'm not going to let your prejudices change that. Evelyn set the cup down in disbelief. Lucas, this is insane. You will destroy everything we have worked for. What you have built has no value to me if it cannot be genuine. Lucas replied, his voice firm. I don't want to just be the Santoro heir. I want to be someone who makes choices with their heart. The silence in the room was piercing. Roberto tried to argue, but Lucas had already made his decision. He got up. I hope one day you understand. But I'm not going to give up who I am because of anyone's opinion. Lucas left, leaving the room in silence. He knew the next step would be the hardest. He met Helena at the gate, at the end of her shift. She seemed surprised to see him. What are you doing here at this hour? He asked, frowning. I'm here for you, Lucas replied. I told my family. I talked about us, and for the first time, I don't feel afraid of what might happen. Helena crossed her arms, still suspicious. Lucas, I already told you that I don't want to be a problem in your life. You're not a problem, Helena. It's the solution I never knew I needed, he said, approaching. I want to be by your side, face everything with you, without hiding anything. Helena watched him for a moment, looking for signs of hesitation. But Lucas seemed genuine, and for the first time she felt like she could believe him. This won't be easy, she murmured. Nothing worthwhile is easy, Lucas replied, smiling. Shortly afterwards, Lucas and Helena decided to leave the condominium. For him, it didn't make sense to continue in a place that represented everything he wanted to change. Together, they began a new journey, far from judgments and suffocating expectations. As they walked hand in hand through the city, Lucas looked at Helena. Let's build something of our own. A place where there are no rules other than the ones we create together. Helena smiled, shaking his hand. Let's go. And this time, without fear. The two set out, determined to face the world with courage and truth. It was the beginning of a rewritten history, where love and respect prevailed above all.